I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today, we're going to be answering some of the questions you guys have sent in over the past week or so. We will continue to do videos like this if you guys continue to send questions. So if you see something on this channel or have some questions about Battleship New Jersey, Navy, World War II, anything like that, feel free to send them in and we'll do our best to answer them. So our first question is about the use of seaplanes. So this is in response to our video down below in the description that talked about different tactics and ship formations and that sort of stuff. And in that video we mentioned that it took a couple years for the United States to build up enough escort carriers to send them into the Atlantic to cover different convoys. The question was, why didn't we use seaplanes for that instead? So a number of nations had seaplane tenders going into World War II, and the United States was building the Barnegat class seaplane tenders, which were 311 foot long, relative, about destroyer size, relatively small ships that could support a squadron of seaplanes. And the seaplanes make great anti-submarine platforms. They can stay up in the air a long time. They see submarines, even submerged submarines. They can see them underwater under certain circumstances, and they can drop depth charges. They can land on the water and rescue downed crewmen. So why weren't we deploying these vessels to the Atlantic? Well, to take off and land from the water, you need relatively smooth water. So, for example, Battleship New Jersey carried float planes. To launch them, we would either have to be in some sort of sheltered lagoon, which is fairly common in the Pacific, not so much in the Atlantic, or if the weather isn't that bad, we can use the ship's wake as she's sailing through the water. She creates a smooth patch behind her, and that wake might be smooth enough under good conditions for an aircraft to take off from or land on. And then once it's landed in the water, it can come up attached to the ship, and then the ship can use its crane to bring it back on board. In the Atlantic, particularly the North Atlantic, where these major convoy battles are being fought, particularly in wintertime when these battles are being fought, you don't have the smooth weather to be able to use these. So even though we were building something like 35 Barnegat class seaplane tenders, it was intended that these were going to be deployed to the Pacific. Now, as it turned out, when we got to the Pacific, the Seabees ended up being way better at their job than anybody gave them credit for pre-war, and they were able to just carve runways out of the jungle left and right on whatever islands we took. So rather than using seaplanes, which did have limitations in speed and capability compared to land-based aircraft, we ended up just using airfields that we carved out of the jungle. So most of these seaplane tenders didn't see too extensive service. Some of them got converted to support PT boats or other things like that, and pretty much at the end of the war, the bulk of them got turned over to the Coast Guard to be used as Coast Guard cutters instead of seaplane tenders. So the British did try to get aircraft at sea with their convoys on ships other than carriers, and they came up with a program where they could launch a Hurricane, a land-based fighter, via a catapult on the front of some of their cargo ships. However, that aircraft couldn't land. It had to crash in the water, and hopefully the pilot could be picked up by an escorting destroyer. So that system was less than ideal. There weren't too many ships that were equipped like that, and by the time enough of those ships could have been built, there were just American carriers all over the North Atlantic, so it wasn't an issue. All right, so our next question is, if Battleship New Jersey is recommissioned, what happens to other Navy ships currently named New Jersey? Now, there's a link to the video in the description that talks about whether we think New Jersey will ever be commissioned again. Long story short, it would have to be a severe national emergency for the Navy to put in the expense of recommissioning a ship and training a crew to use such an old ship. But for the sake of this question, what happens if we recommission New Jersey and there is already a New Jersey in service? This is in response to a video we made about our 3 New Jerseys exhibit, where we talk about the submarine USS New Jersey currently under construction. Now, she'll probably be commissioned in the next couple of years, probably around 2022, which is roughly the same time if there was a severe national emergency now and we had to recommission the ship. That's when she could get back in service. So, stuff like this has happened in the past. Believe it or not, there's precedent. Before World War I, there were a number of old, obsolete ships that were still in service in a limited way, and they were named after states. Some of these were older pre-dreadnought type battleships, like Texas, the first Texas, not the one that's a museum ship today. Other ones were the Big Ten armored cruisers that we had built around the turn of the last century. The armored cruisers at the time they were built were considered capital ships like battleships, so they were named after states like battleships. Not too long after that, they got relegated to second line duty, and so like other smaller cruisers, they were renamed from states to cities in those states. So for example, the pre-dreadnought battleship Texas was renamed San Marcos. The armored cruiser Maryland was renamed Frederick. The armored cruiser New York was renamed Saratoga. However, we then started building a battle cruiser named Saratoga, so she was renamed again to Rochester. Some other ones, Tennessee was renamed to Memphis, and if you're interested in that, look up the Tennessee class cruisers and the Pennsylvania class cruisers. Right after World War I, the United States began building a class of battle cruisers, the Lexington class battle cruisers, which were named after famous ships. 2 of those battle cruisers, Constellation and Constitution, were named after sailing ships that were still technically commissioned in the U.S. Navy. So around 1920-ish, Constitution and Constellation were renamed Old Constitution and Old Constellation to free up their names for new ships being built. When those ships were canceled in 1922, they reverted to their original names. So, what I think would happen if we were to have both the Battleship New Jersey in commission and the submarine New Jersey, either the battleship, as the older one, would be renamed Old New Jersey, and you'd have the submarine New Jersey, or, more likely, the battleship would retain the name New Jersey, and the still uncommissioned submarine would be renamed after a major city in New Jersey, Princeton, which is a famous U.S. Navy ship name that's been carried a lot, or Trenton, or something like that. Okay, so another question we got is about the Mark 38 gunfire control system. This is comprised of the rangefinders for the 16-inch guns and some of the other fire control equipment associated there. Now, I'm no technical expert on these systems, but we're looking at a series of devices which were state-of-the-art in the 1930s and 40s when New Jersey was being built, and which I do not believe have ever been surpassed by another combat system used to aim guns. So the system is the Mark 38 range finders, which there's one on top of the forward superstructure, and there's one on a little armored tower aft of the funnel. And they're sort of shaped like this. These arms on the side are optical rangefinders. You know the distance between the rangefinders here, and so using that, you can sort of use your trigonometry to tell the distance to a target. When New Jersey was being designed, the optical rangefinders were the main way of aiming the guns. But by the time she was built, radar rangefinding had come into effect, and that was able to find the range to the target under much worse conditions than the optical rangefinders. So you could see a target that with the radar that you couldn't otherwise see. So if it was in a smoke screen, if it was in bad weather, and you couldn't optically see it, you could see it with the radar. So this radar was actually attached on top of the rangefinder here, and it's sending out a super high frequency monodirectional signal. So you have to turn the rangefinder at your target, transmit, and it's only got a range of about 25 miles or so. But anything it hits at that 25 miles, it sends a signal back. And this isn't like your normal rangefinder where you've got, or your normal radar where you've got a scope and an arm going around and you see a bunch of pips come up. This is more, because it's a beam going out, hitting a target and coming back, it's more like a blip at the range to the target. So that is giving you a pretty precise range that you can then plug into your fire control computer, your range keeper. And New Jersey has a number of these. There are some Mark III range keepers that are in each of the gun houses for the turrets, but the main part of the system is the Mark VIII range keeper. So this is what is getting all sorts of information from rangefinders and other systems outside the ship plugged into it. It's also getting the information plugged into it automatically, such as the ship's own speed, which is fed from the pit log beneath the ship. So this information gets plugged in and updated automatically. This is a system that nobody else had anything comparable to, because as you're plugging your information in, the range keeper keeps those numbers and continues to solve the problem. So you can update those numbers, but you don't have to physically recalculate every time you're about to shoot the gun again, like most other countries had to do during this time period. Another part of this system was the trigger mechanism, which was gyroscopically stabilized, so it could feel the pitch and roll of the ship. And when you pull the trigger, it would wait for the gyroscope to tell it that the ship was level again, so that the roll of the ship isn't throwing off the aim of your guns, which is good, because New Jersey is very long and very narrow, which makes her a less stable gun platform than other shorter, fatter ships. Gives her a higher speed, but it could throw off the aim of the gun. So this fire control system helps that. So all of these components together create the Mark 38 gun fire control system, which helps aim the guns. Our next question is in response to the video we posted the other week about what destroyed the Arizona. The question was, how does Arizona compare to contemporary ships? So contemporary ships to Arizona would be, say, the British R-class battleships, which are about the same 21-knot speed. They're armed with 8 15-inch guns instead of 12 14-inch guns. Their armor systems are relatively similar. Arizona has the all-or-nothing system. The R-class still has disparate armor patches all over the place. The Japanese Fuso-class battleships were built around the same time. They have the same 12 14-inch main guns, little bit higher speed, a little bit lighter armor. Let's see. In Germany around the same time, you have the battleship Baden being built. She's pretty contemporary to the British R-class, 8 15-inch guns, heavier armor, about the same speed, far less range. Let's see. These vessels that survived the war into the post-war world get to be updated under the Washington Naval Treaty. You get to add a couple thousand tons of deck armor and torpedo protection. And the Japanese, the Americans, the British all did this to some degree or another with their battleships. The Japanese probably spent more resources updating theirs. The British probably spent the least. The American and the Japanese ships got reconfigured superstructures with fire control towers to help aim the guns. It was all modernized in the 1930s. The British ships, because they were some of the newest and best in the Royal Navy, didn't get as much done because they couldn't be withdrawn from frontline service. There were 5 R-class battleships. There were only 2 Pennsylvania-class battleships like Arizona. There were only 2 Fuso-class battleships. So it was much easier to take those ships, which were part of a series. In the American case, there was a series of standard-type battleships where they all had fairly comparable statistics and only slight incremental changes for each class year over year, and relatively small classes, 2 built each year. So you could afford to withdraw 1 or 2 of them at a time. The Japanese had the same thing. They were not projecting power around the world, so they could afford to withdraw their battleships for significant yard periods. The British, R-class, constituted an entire battleship division, so it was difficult to withdraw them for long periods of time, and the British had to police a global empire, and naval treaties had limited them to just a few battleships, the same number as the United States, so they couldn't withdraw them from frontline service as readily. So, extremely comparable. And if the point of this question was to ask, would those ships have been as susceptible? Yes. They were all armored against 14 or 15-inch guns, so a 16-inch shell like that could defeat any of their deck armor, and if it detonated a magazine, it would have destroyed any of those vessels. So Battleship New Jersey is all over social media. The easiest place to leave a question if you're interested in getting one answered like this is just in the comment section down below. We check those out every day. However, feel free to shoot us a question on any of our social media networks, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Heck, you can even send us a ham radio message and we'll be able to get back to you. So remember to like, share, subscribe, and leave your questions down below. And below you'll also see a link where you can donate to help support this channel. Money you donate to the ship allows us to continue doing what we do. So thanks for watching.